most popular question. Probably a third of registrations were asking about what is the average cost for a typical home solar installation. So Henry, since you're a solar installer, I figured that you would be a good man to answer this one.
Well, the average cost, everyone probably knows, has come down dramatically. Right now, it's probably roughly in the $2.50 range, less for bigger systems, maybe a little more for smaller systems, but that's a grid tie system, and those are the least expensive, price per watt, because really a grid tie system just involves the solar panels, an inverter that changes the DC current from the solar array into AC current, and then it sends it out into the grid. There's no backup, there's no storage. If the power goes out from the grid, your system goes off. But that's roughly the cost of doing that. The benefit of those systems really just is you generate electricity from the sun, and it is taken off your power bill through the net metering program, which I think Andrew's going to talk a little more about. There's another type of system which is a grid tied system as well. So you have a different kind of inverter. They call them a hybrid inverter, which has a ability to do the same thing as a regular grid tie inverter, but it also runs off of batteries. So if the power goes out, there's an internal relay that disconnects from the grid, and then you can have critical loads, usually things that you would have during a power outage, like your well pump, lights, some kitchen appliances, things like that. And those systems are a lot more expensive. Those are probably $5 to $6 a watt because of the batteries and the different sort of inverter and all that. And then, of course, you can go completely off the grid and not have grid power at all, which usually you would include a generator as sort of a backup charging source, and that would be similar to the battery-based grid tie system, although maybe a little more, because you probably off the grid would have a larger battery bank, because you need to basically live off of it a lot more than the grid tie battery-based system. The batteries pretty much just stay in standby, and then you're sizing the batteries to carry you for a few hours, as opposed to an off-grid system where you may want to be carried for 3 days. But an off-grid system, you also incorporate a lot more conservation and load efficiency and things like that, because you're off the grid and you're dependent on your own system. So $250 a watt for a grid tie system, which would put, say, a 5 kilowatt system would cost, what does that turn out to, about $15,000, $14,000, and a 10 kilowatt system about $25,000, and then you can do the math on the 6 times that for the hybrid grid tie battery based system.
Awesome, thank you so much, Henry. And talking about the net metering is a good segue into our next question. So the question that we got is, there were a couple of different ones talking about grants, but so the first one is, are there going to be any e-rebates or state and federal grants to help people who are wanting to go solar? And we had another question that asked, what grant options would there be to equip a new habitat self-help build house? So Andrew, go ahead and take it away. I also have that PDF that you sent if you'd like me to get that up right now.
If that's the net metering one, I think we can wait a second on it. Yeah, so for the grant specifically, well, first of all, there are a number of incentives and financing options in Montana for people who are interested in solar. The grant options are pretty limited. Right now, the only grant that you can really get, there are 2 grant options in Montana. There's a Universal Systems Benefits grant, and that money comes from utilities themselves. So it's a state program that Montana statute requires, but the programs are administered by each utility, and so each utility does it a little bit differently. For folks who are on Northwestern Energy, you can apply for a grant, and most of that funding will go towards, really it's kind of for community projects, so schools, libraries, nonprofits. I think they actually removed the portion of USB funds that can go towards private projects and individual households, although that used to be an option back in the day. So the only grant program, and I'm sorry, and then for co-ops, for people who are in co-op territory or MDU, they manage their program a little differently, so it'd be worth reaching out to them directly and just asking. For the other grant option, there's a program administered by the U.S. Department of Agriculture called a REAP grant, the Rural Energy for America program. I'm sorry, Rural Electricity for America program. And that offers grants for people who are in rural areas who are developing renewable energy projects, and does actually offer opportunities for funding energy efficiency projects as well. So those are two really good options to look into. I think pretty much everywhere except like Billings proper qualifies as a rural area in Montana. So a lot of people would be eligible, but I believe the business has to be tied to some kind of agricultural production. So there's a nuance there. Outside of grants, and for the habitat house, I think it depends how the house is qualified. If it ends up, being owned by a private citizen, I don't know that it would be eligible for those grants. But there are tax incentives that you could take. There's a state tax incentive. You can get $500 per taxpayer, up to $1,000 per household. Oh, perfect, thank you. And you can also get the federal investment tax credit, which this year is at 26%. Of the total cost, and that's just taken right off of the total cost of the project, and that's huge. That credit is stepping down from 26% to 22% next year, and in fact it stepped down this year from 30% where it was last year. And there are a lot of national efforts with a lot of advocacy groups to push it back up to 30% and to extend it, but we'll see if any of those get traction. But really that federal investment tax credit is a huge one. Like Henry said, if you're looking at maybe a 5 or 6 kW system, which is pretty standard for a home, you're looking at, $10,000 to $15,000, and that federal credit knocks off a quarter of that right away. And then with the state credit, you take off another 1,000. So you can definitely whittle away at the cost. And we also have some loan options in the state, and maybe I can follow up with folks directly if they're interested in those afterwards. But there are low interest, low options as well.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Sorry I didn't get that financing and incentives page up a little bit earlier. So for our next question, this was asked by a teacher at the Red Lodge High School. And so the question is, we have a ton of solar installations in Red Lodge. How could we summarize the amount of solar energy Red Lodge is currently using and creating? And so Henry took the time to dig around in the numbers and find this answer. So Henry, go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, I went back and looked at the history of at least my installations in Red Lodge, which I will say is probably most of them. I did not include other installations, and I'm not sure there are a lot of those. I know there's a few, but the ones at least I have done since I was doing this, so since 25 years, I came up to roughly 350,000 or 350 kilowatts worth of solar. So that'd be 350,000 watts worth of solar panels that are installed in the Red Lodge area. One interesting statistic that I just looked up is that if you take the population of Red Lodge, which is roughly 2,500 people, and I might be wrong on this, or not, it might be more or less, I'm not sure, but last I knew it was about 2,500 people, and you divide the 300,000 watts of solar by the 2,500 people, you get about 140 watts per person or per capita in Red Lodge. And so then I took, I just Googled a national per capita statistic, and there's a website that comes up to talk about all the cities in the country. Honolulu is #1, and I think they're at about 650 watts per person. But given our low population and our relatively high solar installations, we are in the top 8 in the country for cities solar per capita. And that's all cities, and that also includes cities that have big utility scale, megawatts worth of solar farms and things like that within their jurisdiction. And we don't have that. We have the Beartooth Electric just did a 50 kilowatt system last summer. We have the 50 kilowatt system out at the wastewater plant, and those I think are the largest single installations here. And otherwise, we obviously put a lot of watts up last summer during the Solarize campaign, and then historically there's just a lot of interest and a lot of people that are willing to go solar. And back when Betsy Scanlon was the mayor, she led up, and I'm not going to get this, Andrew, you might remember the name of it, the cities going solar, whatever, that signed a multi-city kind of commitment in Montana. And she just was a leader in the going solar, and she also has her own solar system on her house that I'm too old to redo because that was a steep roof that I remember doing years and years ago. But we have a lot of solar, and if Red Lodge is in the top 10 of the United States for solar per capita, that's pretty good.
Thanks for running those numbers, Henry. I think that's totally amazing that we're in the top 10 per capita. And just as a reminder to anyone who joined us a little bit later, please keep your microphone muted and your camera off. And if at any point you have a question, you can type it into the chat box, and I can interrupt our planned questions to make sure that we cover it. All right, so for our next one, this is when the net metering is going to come into play. So did the Public Service Commission vote to insist that Northwestern Energy allow rooftop solar and net metering without additional taxes? Andrew, do you want to get this one?
I definitely want to get this one because the answer is a resounding yes. I think it's fair to say shocking, but very welcome and very exciting ruling. We got a 5-0 unanimous decision to reject Northwestern's proposal to change net metering. And so that had a number of impacts. What that means really is that nothing changed, and that's a good thing. That's what we wanted. So right now, net metering, which is a rate design, Robin, could you put up the little graphic really quick for those who aren't familiar? So backing up a step, distributed generation is what we call a rooftop solar system or a small wind system or biomass or micro hydro, whatever it is. And that's a generation system that's designed to provide energy that's going to be used on site, so close to where the actual system is. If you net meter, what that means is you've configured your system so that if you're generating more energy than you're using at any given time, that energy will flow out to the grid and can be used by your neighbors and other people that are using the grid really anywhere. It's all connected. If you do that, for any energy that flows onto the grid, you receive a kilowatt hour credit at the full retail rate. So the same price that you pay for energy, you get a credit on your next month's energy bill. And what the utility was proposing was to change how those credits were being valued, and also the utility tried to add additional charges onto people's bills. And again, importantly and very excitingly, we got the PSC to reject that decision. Myself and my organization, MREA, including Henry, who's on our board of directors, worked really hard in that case, so we were really excited at that outcome. One thing that I'll mention about it, which I think carries into future discussions for anybody considering a net metering system, is that legacy customers are protected by statute. And what that means is if you have a system, rooftop solar, small wind, whatever it is, and you are engaging in net metering, if the PSC does make any future changes to rates, you will not be subject to those changes. You will be a legacy customer who gets to maintain the current rate structure that you have. And that is true for any customer that finishes their system up to any future decision that's made. So, for example, if the utility comes back with their next General Electric rate review to change the rates in, say, 3, 4, 5 years, and if they try to change something about net metering again, legacy customers will still be protected going into the future.
Great, thank you, Andrew. For our next, we've got a load of questions all about equipment. And so these ones are going to be for Henry. So the first one, how has the photovoltaic technology improved over the last 10 years? And the second, does any of the equipment wear out or break easily? And the third one, what roof angle and orientation is best? So Henry, go ahead and take it away.
Okay. So how has photovoltaic technology improved over the last 10 years? There are two. The big buzzword is efficiency, which is interesting because we're all used to efficiency, meaning, let's say, a more efficient motor that uses less energy to do the same work. In solar, it's kind of opposite. The efficiency really is just how much space do you need to generate however much power. And so if you have a low efficient panel, then the panel has got to be bigger in order to generate, whatever it's rated at. So let's say a 100-watt panel has to be bigger to generate that 100 watts than it is nowadays. Back when I was doing, when I started this, the efficiency of a standard single crystalline panel, single crystalline meaning it's a pure piece of silicon that they grow in a lab and then cut it into wafers. That's single crystalline. That's the most efficient solar technology. And then there's multi-crystalline, which is basically someone coming and sweeping up all the little pieces of silicon that broke off when they were making the single crystalline cells. And then there's amorphous, which is taking all those little chunks and melting them down and then mixing them all with the soup of various chemicals to destabilize the electrons. And that's really how photovoltaics, the process works. But single crystalline is the most efficient. And back when I started this, they were maybe 12, 13% efficient. And now a standard panel that is, a lot less expensive is more like 19, close to 20% efficient. I just read the other day, I just got a little news thing that there's a panel that just tested out in the lab. They just are developing this that's 47% efficient. And it turned out that 47% is showing promise in the lab. It's not available on the open market yet. But if you can imagine, if you have our area, and Robin, cut me off whenever I'm going over on too much information, but basically the way it works is that we accept a panel and rate its wattage, its power potential, based on standard test conditions, and that is a certain temperature, about 70 degrees Fahrenheit. And then the most important thing is it's certain irradiance. And irradiance is basically just the brightness of the sun. And the sun's irradiance has the potential of about 1,000 watts per square meter. So that means if you had a 100% efficient solar panel, all you would need is 1 square meter to have it be a 1,000-watt panel. Well, if we only have 20% efficient, then what we're going to get with that meter is only 200 watts. Because it's only 20% efficient. It can only capture 20% of the possibility because that's the efficiency of the panel. Well, if we go up to 50% efficient, that's going to mean we can, out of a square meter, we can size solar panel, we can generate 500 watts. And so what that means is that you can squeeze a lot more power out of a smaller system. Or if you want to go with the utility scale systems, a big multi-megawatt utility scale project can be either twice the power from the same size or half the size for the same power. And that's, that's going to make a big difference. So that's probably, in terms of the photovoltaic technology, the biggest advance. Inverter technology has changed dramatically as well. Back in the old days, all the inverters had transformers in them, so they had huge coils of copper that did the transferring from DC to AC. They were super heavy, so say like a 6,000 watt inverter might weigh 150 pounds, and now they're transformerless, so that's a big advance. And the transformerless inverter, a 6,000 watt a transformerless inverter, only weighs maybe 60 pounds or not even that. So it's a lot nicer for me, because back in the day when I had to put 150 pounds of copper on the wall of people's houses, that was a lot more work, and the inverters were nowhere near as efficient. So back then, the inverters were maybe 94, 95% efficient. Now they're more like 97, 98% efficient. So it's really all about efficiency. The technology has improved in that regard. Battery technology has improved, but not as dramatically as I'd like to see it. I think we're on the cusp of major advances in energy storage, but we're still in the sort of research and development mode of that. So there are 3 layers of that question, and I don't remember the other 2.
The other 2 were you sort of hit on one of them. Does any of the equipment wear out or break easily? So you can do that one first, and then I'll
the solar panels, no. There is a possibility they can get damaged by hail, although it's rare. They can withstand the Pyrex type glass that they use in them can withstand a 1/2 inch diameter hail at 100 miles an hour, which is rare. And so I spend a lot more time, and I have a lot on the schedule for this summer of going to Billings, because Billings generally, for the last few years, has gotten major hailstorms, and that has usually destroyed their roof around the solar array, but the solar panels have been fine. And so I have to go take the solar panels down, then they put a new roof on, and then I have to go put the panels back up again. There is one picture, Robin, that I sent you that is a house in Roundup that we did 2 years ago, I think, in April. And many of you may remember the hailstorm that Roundup had in, I think it was June maybe, or May. And it was 4-inch diameter hail, and it lasted for 30 minutes. So for 30 minutes, Roundup was getting rained on by 4-inch diameter hailstones. And this woman that this system is on, once we hit it, I can remind you what the system is. Not a very steep roof. She had 24 solar panels up there, and her entire house was completely destroyed. I mean, the siding was destroyed. Almost every window was smashed out. Her washer and dryer was destroyed. Because the hail, it's that last picture, that one there. That whole house looked like someone had driven around it with a Gatling gun for 30 minutes. All those windows were smashed out. Like I said, the interior of the house was destroyed by the hailstones going through the broken windows and smashing the floor and the washer and dryer and all that stuff. Only 4 of those panels got wrecked. And so even though 4 got wrecked, the fact that array could sit there and withstand that and only lose 4 of them was pretty amazing. Of course, the 4 that got wrecked were completely destroyed, because once you compromise the glass, they just are completely, going to be pummeled. But in any case, the panels are very resilient against hail. That's a common question people ask. Otherwise, power production-wise, they come with a 25-year warranty. They do degrade a little over time, but not by much. And so the panels, I think, are pretty resilient for as long as anyone cares about. The inverters, on the other hand, they all come with at least a 10-year warranty with the option to increase that. I would say you'd be lucky to get 15 years out of an inverter. just because sooner or later something does fail. But that's probably a weak link. And the batteries, of course, if you're doing a battery system, the batteries, depending on what kind of quality battery you get, if you get a high quality battery, it might last you 20 years. If you get sort of a low quality deep cycle battery, it might last you 4 or 5 years.
Thank you, Henry. And we're doing well on time, and so I think we'll have some time at the end for people to ask questions in the chat box. So for our next one, I'll go ahead and share my screen out. So this one was really interesting to me, and it's probably not necessarily a common one, but someone, Yolanda B, wanted to know, how can I use solar and wind energy on the same site? And I believe that Henry and Andrew both might be able to provide some context for this one. So we'll go ahead and start with Henry on this.
Yeah, you can, especially if you are, if you're off the grid or you have a battery-based system, then any charging source to those batteries can be used in conjunction with the inverter. So if you can imagine, you've got batteries, you've got an inverter that's synced with the grid, and then you've got sources that are charging the batteries. And whether it's a wind turbine, whether it's a solar array, whether it's a hydro, whether it's a coal-fired power plant, whatever's coming into those batteries, that inverter will invert and will send out to the grid. So that is just a way you can use all of those technologies at once, which is similar to what, if you were off the grid, same thing. You could have wind charging the batteries, you can have solar charging the batteries, you can have hydro, you can have any source charging the batteries. If you have just straight up grid tie, then for instance, there's an inverter that you would match with your solar array, and that would take the DC from your solar array and send it out to the grid. If you wanted a wind turbine as well, you wouldn't tie that into that same inverter. You would tie that into its own inverter, or a lot of times now the grid tie wind technology kind of has inverters built in, so you can just put your wind turbine out and put that into a different circuit in your house circuit panel board, and have both technologies there. But each of those would be sort of its own separate system with its own separate connection into your house grid system.
Wonderful. And Andrew, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I did. Just one consideration on the kind of policy interconnection side. There have been some instances in the state where folks who have tried to put multiple types of generating systems on their property have not been allowed to net meter all of those systems. And so you just need to be careful about that if you're designing your system that way. And that's something your installer like Henry or whoever else would know about and be able to work through with you. Specifically with Northwestern, we run into some instances of that around where they'll say you can only have one net metered system on your property. So, you know, it kind of leaves you in an awkward position if you're trying to have multiple, like a small wind and a small solar. And that discussion gets pretty nuanced and is actually kind of an open discussion before the Public Service Commission right now that me and MREA are going to try and we're going to try and improve that situation, but it remains to be seen kind of where that's all going to shake out. So I would just mention that it's something to have on your radar, and if you're interested in learning more about that, to reach out to someone like Henry or myself, and we can try and help you through the questions.
Thank you, Andrew. And I just have one extra question that came up in the chat box from Sue Frazier. What is the status of the PACE program legislation?
Yeah, so MREA hasn't worked on PACE as our core issue. We weren't the kind of lead advocates on that one. Our colleagues were, and the last I spoke to folks about the PACE legislation is that well, I'm actually not completely sure, to be honest. I know where it left off last session, which is that I think they felt they had made a lot of progress and that it had gotten legs, but ultimately weren't able to get the votes to move it out. And so I would hope that they're going to try again this next session and then keep kind of beating the drum on passing some kind of PACE legislation, but I don't know specifically. Typically it's, you know, April, this time frame, it's a little early to know what folks are gearing up for next session. I think organizations typically take the summer to start preparing that, and then we'll kind of, you know, try and really hone in on their legislative priorities in September, October, and then once the election happens in November, that's when people will really kind of dive in on what their priorities are going to be. So we may not know more about how that's going to look until later in the summer. So that'd be a good time to start checking in again with organizations on what they're expecting.
Great, thank you, Andrew. And we have one last question that we had prepared in advance. And so this one is, have you considered any institutional investing like in schools? And in the background here, this is a nice picture of the solar panels up on the Red Lodge High School. And so Henry, if you could kick us off with the answer for this one, that would be great.
Yeah, I guess I need a little clarification on exactly what institutional investing, if that is from the schools or from programs that, like Andrew mentioned, the USB program from Northwestern Energy that does fund schools and actually has funded school systems for a long time. One of the things in terms of investing that I know Northwestern Energy ran into a long time ago is that they would be excited, they would get a teacher in the science program of some school that was really into solar and renewable energy and really wanted to use it as a guide or a, sort of a hands-on thing for their students, and then would apply for this money, and they would get the money, and someone like me would go out and put the system up, and then down the road that teacher might move on to another school, and whoever the new teacher is was not as interested in it, and those systems kind of lagged in terms of getting put into the curriculum of the science programs. I don't know if that's a big problem, but I know more and more schools are doing it and are successfully doing it and are incorporated into their program. Red Lodge has a very active teacher that does this, as well as the green team, students that are incorporated in this. The green team of Red Lodge is who actually got the funding for this Red Lodge system, and I think it's a great thing to have. And even if it's not part of the curriculum, just going to school at a school where the kids go into the door every day and they see solar up on the roof, I think is an inspiring thing, and I think it does make certain students look up and say, ask that first question, how do I get into this field, and what's it all about, and how does it work, and all that. And having an actual system on your school is a big thing like that for that. And I do think there are programs and money out there for that, and Northwestern Energy is probably the best right now because that USB funding does apply to schools, and one of the criteria to get that money is adding an educational component to your system. So even if you aren't a school, they would like to have you do something, community group, things that would show off your system or educate the community about it. So Northwestern Energy really does put a high stake in the educational part of these in these systems. Not sure that answers that particular question in terms of institutional investing. I would guess if that was meant to mean financial investment, I think if, for instance, the Red Lodge High School example, that the green team went out and fundraised the money that was their share of the system. I think the school board did approve some of it. It might have been half and half. I'm not sure about that. So that there was some money that came out of the school's budget to put towards this. Obviously, with the amount that they had to put toward it, it's long since paid itself back in terms of the power savings that the system has done. So it was a easy sell for a little bit of money. But I think if you were to go out and ask schools in Montana that are already struggling to just make ends meet on their own budget to put out the money, all the money necessary for a system that may have a 10 to 15 year payback, that's probably a hard sell. But there are a lot of other places that are committed to putting solar up on schools.
Thank you, Henry. And for those of you who joined us a little bit late, because I sent out the wrong link in the reminder, I am so sorry. And just as a reminder, we're doing pretty good on time. So if you do have extra questions, you can go ahead and type them out in the chat box. Right now, I'm just going to share a little table of some of the extra questions that we didn't necessarily plan answers for, but since we have some time, I'll share them out. So the first one that I really want to make sure that we cover, because I got an email asking specifically about it, was these last two down here are what are the advantages and disadvantages of ground-mounted versus roof-mounted solar arrays? So Andrew or Henry, if either of you want to jump in and take that one, go for it.
Yeah, I can talk to that, and then Andrew can chime in as well. I can list off a few advantages of ground mounts. Probably the biggest in our area is that if your panels are close to the ground, you can take a broom or some sort of a foam lightweight device, and you can scrape the snow off of them, and you might be able to squeeze another 5 or 8% out of the production, annual production, especially in the Red Lodge area. Snow is a big derater for our systems here. So that would be one benefit. Another benefit for the ground mount is that, as I mentioned before about hail damage, if your roof gets hail damaged, instead of having to pay that extra money to remove the panels and put them back up, you're probably good to go with your ground mount. The biggest disadvantage of a ground mount is the expense. There's a significant amount of excavation that's involved, and cement, and racking system that all has to be engineered to high winds and all that, and that adds a bunch of money to the system. Unlike your house, because your house already exists. So if you have rafters or trusses or things like that that can handle the weight, which most every house can, of your solar, then putting it on your roof is a lot less expensive than spending the money and building a whole other structure on the ground. But I don't know if that is the full list of pros and cons to ground versus roof. I would say, in my experience, it really is. It's not really up to me. I'll say that to a potential customer, but I have plenty of customers that just want it on the ground, and that's what they want. And they don't want it on the roof for a wide range of reasons. People sometimes worry about drilling holes in their roof and slagging things in. I don't worry so much about that. We're in a pretty good area where we do get a lot of moisture, but we're not in an area like Seattle or Oregon or even California where we can just get deluged for day after day after day. And even that, there's plenty of sealant and plenty of ways to prevent having your roof leak. So that's really not a realistic concern, but that's not to say people don't have that. So if you have that concern and you would like it out on the ground, or you don't, or aesthetically you don't want it up on your roof, then that's a perfectly legitimate reason to look at a ground mount. And like I said, the only real downside of a ground mount is the expense.
Thank you, Henry. One question I kind of want to make sure we get to, just for my own selfish benefit as a renter that is living on an AmeriCorps stipend. What is some advice you can give renters or folks with modest incomes of tangible ways to support renewable energy infrastructure, and what legislation can we support with our vote?
Yeah, I can
Andrew
jump
or Henry.
Yeah. So first of all, yeah, unfortunately, there aren't a ton of options for renters and folks with lower incomes, largely because in order to be a in order to invest in any kind of shared solar program, if folks are familiar with that concept. So a shared solar array is a concept where an energy provider or some developer will build, for example, in a 100 kilowatt system, and then they'll sell subscriptions to that system. So instead of buying, a 10 kW system and putting it on your own roof, you can buy maybe just a couple panels, so maybe just like a single kilowatt from that larger solar array, and you will get the benefits of it as if the system were on your roof. So sometimes that's called virtual net metering. A lot of people call it shared solar or community solar. A number of co-ops have developed shared solar options. I know Beartooth has. I'm not sure exactly which others. I have the list, but off the top of my head, I can't remember all of them. Some of them in the western part of the state. I know Missoula Electric, Flathead. Down the Bitterroot, I know there's one. So there are some co-ops doing that, and they can do it because they're governed differently by state laws than the investor-owned utilities like Montana and Dakota and Northwestern Energy are. So if you're served by a co-op, you can talk to them about developing a shared solar array if they haven't already. If they have developed one, you can talk to them about getting a subscription. For Northwestern customers, unfortunately, our interpretation of statute right now is that Northwestern can't offer shared solar subscriptions because of the way net metering statutes are written. And there's more nuance to that, which I won't bore people with, but to make a long story short, that's one of the policies that MREA has tried pushing in the past, and we are trying to move that forward. As far as, stepping outside of kind of the personal renewable energy infrastructure, the small scale, there are always policies that we are trying to push to expand renewable energy generation in Montana. And so, like I mentioned a little earlier, I think later in the summer, when advocacy groups start preparing for the legislative session, I think that's an important time to start checking your email for their notifications, for their action alerts, and make sure that you're on email lists. Actually, that's one tangible thing you can do. I know I send out action alerts to MREA's listserv, to our email listserv, and it's really helpful to have a larger group of people to send those to let people know. Things move so quickly in the legislative session that being able to get an email out to folks and know that 10, 15, 20, 30, 50, 100, however many people are going to be able to write a public comment really quickly in support of something is extremely helpful. And then, importantly, we also play a lot of defense up at the legislature, and I want to make a special call out for that because it's almost just as important sometimes than playing offense and trying to push proactive policies. Is playing defense and protecting the statutes that we have that are allowing current renewable energy development to continue. Things like tax incentives, like net metering laws, like large-scale renewable financing laws, large-scale renewable development in general. We've seen attacks on these in the past, and I think we need to work to continue to protect those. And then lastly, as far as low income or lower income, if that's a consideration, the shared solar policy helps because it's a lower financial cost to subscribe to maybe one or two panels versus financing your entire solar array. So that's an option. That's a policy that's worth pushing for. And as a renter, you could look into that policy as well. Other than that, there isn't a ton right now. But I will mention that MREA is actually specifically launching a research project this summer to start looking in a more concerted way into how to expand renewable energy generation for lower income customers, specifically low income customers, and very much in rural and tribal communities. So it's something that we have noticed more people asking about and really want to try and find some answers to. And our goal is to do some research this summer and try and prepare some work for either this upcoming legislative session or the ones after it to try and make some of those policies a reality. That was a lot, so I'll stop there.
One thing I'll add, that's very easy, very tangible. Anyone, even the lowest of incomes, can afford, is to join MREA. And I think, what is it, at $20? $20 for an individual membership. I did run into some people during the Solarize project last year that I explained, MREA and what it does, and I think maybe because it started, and it still is, sort of a trade group in the state. It started mostly from the likes of me and my colleagues that got together and wanted an association of people that were part of this technology and this industry in Montana. It has since evolved tremendously. Back in those days, we didn't have any sort of staff or anything else, and now we have Andrew, who is awesome, as our executive director, and we're doing a lot more lobbying the legislature, trying to do policy things and things like that that have expanded beyond just the sort of installer technology kind of group. But I did get a lot of questions from people last summer because they had heard of MREA, but they thought it wasn't really available for anyone to join. And so, if that's a feeling out there, then I would like to just ask all of you to spread the word that the Montana Renewable Energy Association is ready for you to join, and we would be very happy involvement in this technology because we are the only advocacy group specifically for renewable energy development in Montana.
Thanks, Henry. And yeah, I would also like to throw my hat in the ring saying MREA is a great organization. I've been getting the newsletters since I started working here, and they're really helpful just to stay up to date on what's going on. And I'm actually not an MREA member, so I think I will have to become one after this. So that is about all the time that we have. Thank you so much to everybody who joined. And again, I'm really sorry that I sent out the wrong link in the reminder email this morning, but hopefully you're here watching the recording. Andrew and Henry, do you have any final remarks before we sign off here?
Just thank you for inviting me to participate in this, and thank you all for having an interest in this technology. We've got a ways to go. I think it's all changing, and sooner or later, one of the things that I've said before to some school groups that I talk with is the immense potential of the sun's energy. I have some statistics that I'm not going to remember, but it's something like 1 second of the sun's radiation produces enough energy to power all of humans' energy consumption for a year, kind of thing, or more. It's just an outrageously huge source of energy, and the better we can harness that, the cleaner we can harness that, and solar is one of those ways that it's still pretty rudimentary in terms of only being 19% efficient, but if we're getting close to 50% efficient and we can start turning light from the sun into electricity at that rate, then I think we have a very good future ahead of us in terms of clean energy and all that, especially when people have to pay people to take their barrel of oil right now.
Yeah, as a closing thought, I'll just say, again, thank you for inviting me to join, and thank you for everyone who tuned in. And that a lot of the things that Henry and I touched on today, there's even more information on MREA's website. And, as an organization, we have two primary goals. And one of those is to educate Montanans about renewable energy. So our website is set up and designed for consumers, for Montanans interested in learning more. So I really encourage you to hop on there and click around and find some additional information. We have tons of downloads and handouts. And if there's ever a question that you can't find the answer to on our website, my email and phone number are up there. And this is what I am fortunate enough to get paid to do. So I hope you will use that resource, and I would be very happy to be that resource for you.
Great, thank you. I will send everyone out the recording once it's up. But in the meantime, hang in there, everybody. Thank you for joining in these very strange times. And happy Earth Week.